Listen up, because I am only going to say this once, and if you miss the signal through the noise of your own excuses, then you deserve the mediocrity you are currently drowning in. Because the reality of wealth is not a secret hidden in a mountain, but a mathematical certainty that most of you are too soft to execute. You want to know why you are stuck in a cycle of anxiety and why your bank account looks like a graveyard of poor decisions and missed opportunities? Well, it starts with the biological fact that your brain is literally failing you. Because when you live paycheck to paycheck or hover around that pathetic zero line, you are trapped in a scarcity mindset that scientific studies have proven drops your cognitive function by 13 full IQ points, which means you are navigating a complex financial world with the mental capacity of a severely sleep-deprived person or someone who is intoxicated. And this isn't just a metaphor, because when you are stressed about rent or that credit card bill, your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you lose the ability to perform long-term planning or exercise the impulse control required to build a legacy. You are walking around in a fog of survival, which makes you incapable of seeing the macro trends, and instead, you focus on the micro survival of the next 48 hours. And that is exactly where the system wants you, because a man with 13 fewer IQ points is a man who can be sold a car he cannot afford and a lifestyle he hasn't earned. You think you're doing okay because you managed to scrape together $10,000 in a savings account and you feel a false sense of security, like you've actually built a foundation. But let me tell you that $10,000 is a total illusion of safety and a complete joke, because you are one bad afternoon away from total insolvency. And I want you to visualize this right now as you're feeling proud of that tiny pile of cash, because you hit a pothole and your transmission explodes, which is a $3,000 repair, and then your laptop, which you need for work, fries its motherboard, which is another $2,000. And suddenly, $5,000 of your $10,000 is gone in 72 hours. And now you're back to four figures, and the crushing weight of anxiety returns to your chest like a lead weight. That $10,000 isn't wealth. It is a temporary stay of execution that keeps you on a perpetual anxiety treadmill, where you're constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next emergency to punch you in the throat. And you'll never get ahead until you realize that the first $100,000 is the only milestone that actually matters, because it is the point where the math of the universe finally starts to bend in your favor. Let's talk about the cold, hard numbers of the 8-4-3 rule of compounding, which is the fundamental law of wealth that none of you understand because you want instant gratification, like a child reaching for a piece of candy instead of a kingdom. Because in the first phase of your journey, which usually takes about 8 long, grueling years of sacrifice, your growth is dominated entirely by your contributions and not by the market. And this is where most of you quit, because you look at your portfolio after 3 years of eating ramen and driving a beat-up car, and you see that you've only made a few $1,000s in interest, and you scream that the system is a scam and that compounding doesn't work. But you are wrong, because during those first 8 years, you are the engine and the money is just the passenger. And you have to shovel coal into that furnace every single day without seeing the train move more than an inch. But then something miraculous happens in the next 4 years, because the momentum you built in the first 8 begins to snowball, and the interest starts to rival your contributions. And then, in the final 3 years of that cycle, your wealth doubles again, purely on the back of the market's heavy lifting, without you having to lift a single finger. This is the geometric progression of wealth that the wealthy understand and the poor ignore, because they can't get past the first 8 years of boredom and sweat, and they would rather buy a status symbol to look rich now than actually be rich later. Which brings me to the absolute cancer of the high-income poverty trap, where I see people making $150,000 to $380,000 a year who are functionally broke, because they are suffering from the most pathetic disease known to man, which is lifestyle creep. You get a promotion and suddenly you think you've made it. So you go out and buy what I call a Pavement Princess, which is an $80,000 luxury truck that has never seen a speck of dirt in its life and has never hauled anything heavier than a bag of organic kale from the grocery store, and you're paying $1,500 a month for the privilege of sitting in traffic in a vehicle that is depreciating faster than your reputation. You lease a BMW or a Mercedes because you want your neighbors to think you're a player. But the reality is that your net worth is lower than the kid delivering your pizza, because at least he doesn't have 6 figures of consumer debt hanging around his neck like a millstone. These people are quietly broke, and they are living in a gilded cage of their own making because they are slaves to their overhead, and if they miss 2 paychecks, they are out on the street with nothing to show for it but a collection of designer watches and leather seats that smell like desperation. Real wealth is stealth wealth, and it is the guy driving a 10-year-old Honda or a Toyota who lives in a modest house and wears a plain t-shirt because he doesn't have anything to prove to people he doesn't like, and he knows that every dollar he doesn't spend on a status symbol is a soldier working for him in the market. You need to understand that the things you own end up owning you, and if you are working a job you hate just to pay for a car that makes you look successful to strangers, then you are the ultimate loser in the game of life because you have traded your freedom for a shiny piece of metal. To escape this trap, you need daily systems for wealth because your willpower is a finite resource that will fail you when you are tired or hungry or stressed. So you have to automate your success through things like the Morning Money Minute, where you spend exactly 60 seconds every single day looking at your balances and your expenditures, not to obsess over them, but to stay tethered to the reality of your situation, because denial is the preferred drug of the broke. You also need to implement the 24-hour wealth capture system, where you automate your investments so that the money is taken out of your account the moment it hits, before you even have a chance to see it or think about spending it. Because if the money never reaches your checking account, it never becomes a temptation, and you learn to live on what is left over, which is the only way to break the cycle of consumption. When you finally hit that $100,000 threshold, something fundamental shifts in your psychology, because for the first time in your life, a $3,000 emergency is no longer a catastrophe, but a mere 3% rounding error that doesn't even change your heart rate, and you realize that your money is finally starting to work as hard as you do. Because if you have $100,000 invested and you get a modest 10% return, you are making $10,000 a year while you sleep, which is more than some people make working a part-time job for 1,000 hours. That is the moment you realize that money is not for buying things, but for buying time. And that is the ultimate goal, which is optionality. Because wealth isn't about the Ferrari or the mansion. It is about the absolute and total ability to walk away from any situation that doesn't serve you. It is the ability to tell a toxic boss to go to hell because you have 2 years of living expenses sitting in a liquid account. And it is the ability to spend your Tuesday morning at a park with your kids instead of in a fluorescent-lit cubicle grinding for someone else's dream. The first $100,000 is a bloodbath because you have to fight your own biology and your own ego and the entire marketing apparatus of the Western world that is designed to keep you poor and distracted. But once you cross that line, the gravity of wealth begins to pull you toward the $1 million mark with an inevitability that feels like magic, but is actually just the compounding effect of discipline and math. You have to decide right now if you want to be a person who looks rich or a person who is actually wealthy, because you cannot be both in the beginning. And if you choose the path of the Pavement Princess and the least luxury and the status symbols, then you are choosing a life of quiet desperation and financial slavery. But if you can stomach the boredom of the first 8 years, and if you can handle the social pressure of being the guy with the old car and the modest house, then you will eventually reach a level of freedom that 99% of the population will never even imagine. And it all starts with the realization that your current lifestyle is a lie, and your current excuses are a death sentence for your future self. You need to look in the mirror and admit that you are the problem, but you are also the stateport. Only solution, and you need to stop waiting for a windfall or a lottery win or a government handout, because none of those things are coming to save you. And the only thing that will save you is a cold, clinical commitment to the math of wealth building. The first 100,000 is the hardest because it requires a total personality transplant where you kill the consumer version of yourself and birth the investor version of yourself. And that process is painful and lonely and slow, but it is the only way to earn your soul back from the marketplace. You think you're tired now. Wait until you're 65 and you have to work a service job because you didn't have the discipline to save when you were 30. And that is the real nightmare you should be afraid of, not the temporary discomfort of driving a boring car or skipping a vacation. Every single dollar you spend on something you don't need is a theft from the person you are going to become, and you need to start treating your future self with a lot more respect than you currently are. The math doesn't care about your feelings, and the market doesn't care about your intentions. It only cares about your capital and your time, and if you give it both with consistency, you will win. But if you try to shortcut the process, you will be crushed. Stop being a victim of your own impulses and start being the architect of your own freedom. Because once you hit that six-figure mark, you will look back at your old life and wonder why you ever cared about the opinions of people who are just as broke as you used to be. The journey to the first $100,000 is a test of character disguised as a financial goal. And if you can pass that test, the rest of the world opens up to you in ways you can't even perceive yet, because you'll finally have the optionality to live life on your own terms. And that is the only true wealth that exists. So get to work and stop complaining, because nobody is coming to help you, and the clock is ticking on your potential. If you actually want to change, then you need to start today by looking at your bank statement and calculating exactly how much money you wasted last month on things that depreciated to zero the moment you bought them. And then you need to take that number and multiply it by 10 years of compound interest to see the true cost of your ignorance. Because once you see the millions of dollars you are throwing away on trinkets, you might finally wake up and start playing the game to win. This isn't a motivational speech, it is a survival guide for the modern era. And if you are smart enough to listen, then you will take the first step toward that $100,000 finish line right now without hesitation. Because every second you spend debating is a second you spend staying poor, and you have already spent enough of your life in that position. The psychological shift of reaching $100,000 in liquid savings is the most profound transformation you will ever experience, because it is the moment you transition from being a piece of the machinery to being the owner of the factory. And that sense of power and stability is worth more than any designer label or luxury interior. You have the map and you have the math, and now the only question left is whether you have the stomach to follow it through to the end, or if you are going to fold like a lawn chair the next time you see a shiny new toy that you think will make you happy, but will actually just keep you in chains. The choice is yours, but don't you dare complain about your life 5 years from now if you choose the easy path today, because you were warned and you were given the blueprint. And the only thing standing between you and absolute freedom is your own lack of discipline and your own addiction to the hollow validation of a society that wants you to stay broke. Build your fortress $1 at a time, and eventually you will have a wall high enough that the world can't touch you. And that is when you will finally know what it means to be free.